Good day. Today we're going to set up our initial virtual machine for this course. You'll want to prepare some things up front. You'll want to make sure that you have at least 36 gigabytes of free disk space on your primary hard disk. You'll also want to download the install media. You'll want to have proper license keys in a folder. You'll want to have the Virtualbox software and extensions, the latest version, in this case 6.1.36. But by the time you watch this video, there may be a different version. Just make sure that the extension pack version matches the Virtualbox version. What we'll do today, we'll break down into 3 steps or tasks. For the first step, we'll set up our virtual features in the BIOS or startup of our system. We'll download Virtualbox and the extensions and then load them into our system using Run as Administrator. When we're done, we'll capture a screenshot to show how this is complete. Save it as a JPEG file with your first initial and last name. So here you see my example and step 1. For step 2, we'll create a virtual hard disk and give it the name of the system we'll build, in this case a Windows Server Standard Edition C drive, and we'll build this in a directory we've created called VHD on the C drive. And once that is captured, once that is created, I'm going to capture a screenshot of the properties and save it as a JPEG file. Then I'm also going to use that image captured. I'll save it with my name in step 2. Step 3 has 2 separate tasks actually. So in the first part of step 3, we're going to use the virtual machine application software, in this case Virtualbox, and we're going to use the install media stored in the temp folder, the server ISO we just showed you, our Windows Server ISO, and we'll use our license key and we'll set up our own virtual machine. And when we get to the point where we start to enter the activation key, once that's on the screen completely, we want you to capture that screen with in a previous assignment you were tasked with capturing and downloading the server ISO and license keys. So we want to be able to reference those things, and that's what we want you to do, is to capture this screenshot so it shows the activation key you got in the previous assignment is being used for the setup of this machine. That's the first part. Once you complete the virtual machine setup and start it, we want you to log in with the account that you've decided on, and you're going to access that start menu and hold your mouse over the account icon. You'll see it. Basically what we want to do is click here and then wherever that is so that your account will show. And that's the screenshot you want once you're logged in. You'll capture that and save it as step 3B with your name. For additional credit, you can perform the steps you use to optimize your personal technology. Again, in a previous assignment. So if we go a little further back, you'll see an assignment that has to do with preparing your personal technology and optimizing it for virtual machine use. And what you'll do is you'll perform the tasks to download updates and then to perform a disk cleanup and a disk defrag, basically. So there you have it. We'll get started, and let's take each step one at a time. So to set up the virtual features in your BIOS or startup settings, you have to power off your laptop or PC and then press a specific key. It's different for each brand. In this case, for my Lenovo, I'll press F1 when I see the Lenovo logo on my screen. And what this will bring up is an option for startup settings. And it's also referred to as the BIOS. I'll look in the configuration menu, or I'll look in the security menu. It could be in either place, but what I want to do is enable the virtualization features, including the device features. So once this is set, the important thing to remember is that you do need to intentionally press the right function key to save and exit, and it'll ask, are you sure you want to save the changes? And you'll answer yes. If you don't do this, the change for that setting to enable it will not take. So please be sure to do that. You're going to want to download Virtualbox and the extensions. We've already done that, and it's in the temp folder. When I load this, I'm going to want to right-click it with my right mouse button and then select Run as Administrator. It'll ask if I really want to do that, and I'll answer yes. And all I'm going to do is accept the default settings to configure VirtualBox. I'll get a warning about network interfaces, and the screen might flicker a little bit, but otherwise things usually come back. So click yes, and then say install, and this will run for some time. If it takes longer than just a moment on this system, we'll pause it until it's finished. So I'm going to start the VirtualBox extension, but in this case I want to load the extension pack first. So I'm going to uncheck the box and click Finish. If I select the VirtualBox extension pack and try to run that as administrator, you'll see that it does not have an option to do that, but just double click it. It'll ask if I want to install it. I've done this before for demos, so I'm just going to click reinstall, but in your case it'll ask if you want to install it, or it may show an older version. Just accept it and say I agree, and answer yes, and it will load the installation pack. At this point, what you want to do is capture the screen and save it. The preferences for VirtualBox Manager, and select a default machine folder that we've created specifically for this. Now, if you don't create a separate VM folder on your C drive, VirtualBox will tend to use a directory it creates within your Documents folder. And should you have Office 365 installed on your laptop, that can cause problems. If it's synchronized to install or to store data for your applications in the cloud using OneDrive, then what will happen is that you'll try to create a virtual machine, except it'll sync to the cloud, and these are very large files, and that'll be painfully slow and it won't work well. So you want to make sure your default machine folder has been set up already. If you don't see it listed there, you can hit the pull down and select Other, and then go into where it says My Computer or This System, and then select the C drive, and then navigate to your VM folder so that it shows C:\VM. So another good thing to do is basically to, if you haven't already, check to make sure that your install media is complete. You can do that with a checksum, or you can calculate a hash. We've handled that in a separate video. For more information, contact the instructor, but you want to make sure that it hasn't been corrupted, the file is complete. In this case, the install media for Windows Server 2022 has both editions, the Data Center Edition and the Standard Edition, and depending on the license key you put in, it'll pare it down from there, but this is a 5.16 gigabyte download, and if you check it before the install setup for step 2 and it doesn't show 5,550,684,160 bytes, then something is wrong. And that's for this particular version of the ISO. So those things should match. The numbers here for the bytes and this version number. If you're watching this later on in the semester and a new version has been released, you may have a different size and a different version number, but that information would be posted separately, so you can check that. So we'll start with step 2 then. In step 2, we want to create a fixed virtual hard disk, and we want to give it a name that reflects the purpose of the server. This is an initial virtual machine, so it's going to have a variety of basic purposes. So we'll just use an abbreviation: Win for Windows, SVR for server, STD for standard edition, and then we'll put a -C for the drive letter that we want this virtual hard disk to become, right? So, and then we'll store it inside the VHD directory. So we'll capture a screenshot of the VDI properties after it's been created and save this as a JPEG file. To create the virtual disk, we're going to use in Virtualbox an option off of the File menu called Virtual Media Manager. We're going to create a new VDI image, and we're going to make sure it's a fixed size. That means we want to dedicate 36 gigabytes of disk space up front instead of dynamic allocation. That's going to run faster and with greater reliability. So we'll click next, and this is where I put that name in. I want to make sure that it has a name that makes sense, and I want to put it in the VHD folder. We've created a VHD directory in the same way that we created a VM folder. So we're going to change the name of this so that it reads Win SRV for server and STD-C. And we'll change this so that it's 36 gigs large. That's where the drive space on your C drive, your physical C drive, is important. We had 66 gigs, so this will leave us 30 gigs of C drive space left once I've created the virtual hard disk. I'll click Create, and at this point Virtualbox will begin creating a 36 gigabyte virtual hard disk for use with our first virtual machine. You see here it's 1 minute and 39 seconds. We'll pause the recording, and that way we can save a little time. So the process has completed, and now you see the disk is listed in the Hard Disks tab of the Virtual Media Manager, and it shows that it's 36 gigs large. You want to go ahead and slide this over here to the side up in the corner, and then we want to open up our File Manager, and we want to navigate into the C drive, into the VHD folder, and we should see that a file has been created with 37,750,784 kilobytes. Well, that's actually billions of bytes. It's or gigabytes. So if I go ahead and right-click this and select Properties, you see it's 36 gigabytes. And the precise number of bytes altogether, instead of kilobytes, it's bytes, is 38,656,802,816. If this was created properly, that's the answer you should see on your screen. And so, if you would, you can minimize this and show the 2 and capture this screenshot so that it shows the virtual media manager with the 36 gig hard drive, virtual hard drive, and then the properties in Windows shows, yes it is, it's in Windows, it's actually a hard disk. So 36 gigs. And this will complete step 2. Remember to put your name with that screen capture so that in case things get mixed up, we know which student submitted. Now we're ready to move on to step 3. For step 3A, we're going to create the virtual machine, but we have to get to the point where we're entering the activation key to install the operating system media. So that's quite a bit of tasks. We'll begin by creating a new virtual disk, and as soon as we start to type win and srv std, we'll use that as the name of the server, and that helps us understand which operating system, whether it's a server or client OS, and which edition it is. Is it a data center edition, a standard edition, education edition, and so on. We want the machine folder to reflect the VM directory, and if it doesn't, you want to hit the pull down and do this to select, to navigate to the VM folder. But the most important thing is that you want to change the type of Windows. Virtualbox does not list Windows 2022 yet, but 2019 is close enough. It needs to be 64-bit mode. You'll click Next. If your laptop has 8 gigs of RAM, you should increase the amount of RAM that's used for this virtual machine to half of what your laptop or PC has physically for RAM. And in my case, I have 12 gigs of RAM, so I'm going to use half of that. That's going to help things load faster when I create the machine, so I'll put 6172. How did I come up with that number? I took a calculator and standard calculator, and I took 1024, that's megabytes in gigabytes, and I'm going to multiply that by the half the number of gigs of RAM I have in my system. So I have 8 gigs of RAM, I'm going to put 4, or in my case I have 12, I'll put 6 times 6 equals, oh, it's 6144. Okay, so I'll put 6144, I'll click Next. I don't want to create the virtual hard disk. I've already done this. I'll use an existing one and select here, and in this case I'll choose my new Windows Server Standard C drive. Once that's showing, I can click Create, and my virtual machine has been created. But it's an empty virtual machine. It isn't loaded with Windows yet. And one of the things that's good to do once a virtual system is built and configured, you want to click the Settings option and then click each of these options to see if a yellow exclamation point appears. It also gives you a chance to unselect or disable options that you really don't use. And you can select the processor tab, and if you have 4 virtual CPUs, you can increase the number of CPUs again so that it loads faster. For the display, you're going to want to slide the video memory all the way to the end. And if you see that yellow exclamation point, it'll have a description down here, and it'll usually say something like, oh, you need to change the graphics controller type. It'll recommend a graphics controller type. So to simulate that, here's an example. If I have VBox VGA on my system and you see this yellow exclamation point, by holding your pointer over it, it says, hey, try the VBox SVGA instead. Your screen may be different, but follow whatever it is it said you should use, and then consider switching to it. Go ahead and do that. I would also check this box, and then at that point the yellow exclamation point will disappear. But you see I haven't changed it to VBox SVGA, so I'm going to do that now, VBox SVGA, and my yellow exclamation point is cleared. So that often removes much of the failures that occur when you first build a virtual machine. I'm also, as soon as I check that 3D, it gives me more memory I can use for my graphics capabilities, so I'm going to slide that all the way to the end. For my storage, a very important thing you want to do is load the install media from Windows. So at this point you're going to click the empty DVD tray, which was created when your virtual machine was built. This is just like a real DVD tray. In order to load the disk media in there, you're going to choose a disk file, and you'll navigate to the temp folder where you've stored your Windows Server ISO. Double click that. At that point you'll see the disk is loaded. It's an install file, but it functions just like a plastic disk. For the audio, you don't need to change anything. If you see this, you want to change it to bridged. By changing your network adapter to bridged, it means your virtual machine will behave just like your laptop or your PC on your home network, and you'll be able to work with that. You want to accept whatever default network interface is listed here, but when it creates your virtual machine, it'll probably create a virtual wired interface instead of a wireless interface if you're running on a laptop. That's okay, it's not a problem. You can leave the rest of the settings the same. You don't want to change anything else as long as you don't have any yellow exclamation points. I unchecked the floppy disk because I don't really have a floppy disk on my physical laptop or hard drive or my PC. So there's no point in having that feature enabled. But at this point I'm ready to start my machine, and when I start my machine, if I'm on my laptop, I want to use the detachable start in case my laptop goes into battery save mode. Whenever you're building a virtual machine, you should have your power supply connected to your laptop so that you don't go into power save mode while the rest of your physical laptop or PC is idling as your virtual machine is being built. Your virtual machine is going to operate in a manner where it's not very aware of the actual physical machine that supports it. So your physical machine, your laptop and your PC and your virtual machine may or may not know about each other. And for a laptop, this gets to be a problem. You can do all sorts of things in your virtual machine, and your physical laptop will think it's doing nothing and go into power save mode and suddenly cut off. And this is the setting to avoid that problem. If you just click the green arrow, it'll start normally, but again, you may have some problems with power save. So use detachable start, and at this point it's creating the virtual machine and starting it up. And if you don't see a window pop up, you can double click this miniature display and the large one will open. You're going to want to close the extra banners that are here. If I select the standard, the first option, I do not get a graphical user environment. At this point, you'll notice that a user license shows up. You'll accept the agreement after you review it and click next. You want to select custom, And at this point, you want to select all of the unallocated space. If you configured your virtual machine correctly, you'll see 36 gigabytes here. And that's a very good sign. You'll just click Next. There are cases where you'd want to click New and reserve some of that disk space for a different drive letter, but in this case we'll accept all of it because we want just one C drive that's 36 gigs large. And confirm the password for a username that's hard-coded to read administrator. We will review in a later session how to rename and disable this account as it presents as a, well, it's an attractive nuisance and a vulnerability. It's an exposure, so we don't want to leave that name administrator. And as soon as I have my login screen, I'm going to go to my input option to the keyboard, insert Control-Alt-Delete,